families, creating a lifetime of memories. Sadly, some families are denied these important moments due to the sad practice of alienation. These are families divided.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Families Divided TV. I'm Elaine Cobb. I'm your host and also executive producer of Families Divided TV. In this episode, Dr. Edward Kruk will be speaking to grandparents on strategies to use in the alienation that you have with your grandchildren. Dr. Kruk has done much study in the field of alienation, not only in parental alienation, but also grandparent alienation. He is now getting ready to do another study in grandparent alienation regarding grandparents who have never met their grandchildren, such as the case with myself and my husband Chester with our granddaughter Dare, who is now 11 years old. So there's much work that needs to be done, and Dr. Kruk in this episode is giving us some very important information to help. So he'll be back with this for you right after these messages.
Divorce and co-parenting are a major life interruption for families, especially the kids, but also for parents and grandparents. And it's even worse in blame-filled, high-conflict cases. When parents engage in alienation by turning the kids against the other parent or grandparents, kids suffer. They're denied the opportunity to build the 4 big skills necessary for future resilience. New Ways for Families online class can help. Parents learn to use our popular BIF and EAR skills to calm the conflict and stop the hostile emails and texts. And we even have a class for kids and parents to learn together. Research shows a 75% improvement in joint parental decision-making after this course is taken, plus overall improvements for kids' well-being. Don't wait to make this affordable investment in your children's future and improve your well-being too. Start learning new ways for your family today at conflictplaybook.com.
Well, greetings from beautiful Vancouver, Canada. The background image you see is the Japanese garden at the University of British Columbia, which is directly adjacent to my office, in fact. So I'd like to speak to you today about strategies for addressing grandparent-grandchild alienation. The alienation of grandparents from the lives of their grandchildren after parental separation has been largely overlooked in social science research, despite the fact that the importance of the grandparent-grandchild attachment bond is the subject of considerable research. We've lots of data in regard to the roles of grandparents in contemporary society, but actually very little in regard to the alienation of grandparents from the lives of their grandchildren. In the next 20 or so minutes, I'd like to share with you the results of my study on grandparent alienation based on in-depth interviews with 55 alienated grandparents. In other words, to share with you the perspective of grandparents themselves. There are 4 primary circumstances associated with grandparent alienation: parental separation, conflict with both parents, the death of an adult child, and step-parent adoption following remarriage. But the most common circumstance is grandparent alienation after parental separation, and that'll be my main focus today. In particular, paternal grandparents are at high risk of losing contact with their grandchildren when the child-in-law is the custodial mother. The second thing I'd like to do is to talk about destroyed or disrupted grandparent-grandchild relationships, which some grandparents describe as a primal wound, well, these have profound negative consequences for grandparents and grandchildren alike. And that has important implications for legal policy and therapeutic practice. So that'll be the focus of the second half of my presentation, strategies for addressing grandparent-grandchild alienation. At the outset, it's important to note that the roles of grandparents are the subject of a great deal of research. We know that as older persons now live longer and remain healthy for a longer period of time, they're more likely to become grandparents and maintain that role for a prolonged period. Nearly 70% of older people in North America are grandparents, and usually they have contact with at least one grandchild. Based on current life expectancies, many will be grandparents for at least 20 or 30 years. In the research, grandparents are described as providing a source of unconditional love and companionship to their grandchildren, acting as emotional buffers and mediators between children and their parents, and being the purveyors of family tradition, providing children with a sense of roots and identity. Grandparents are seen as contributing to child development by providing respite care for parents. For many children and their grandparents today, the grandparent-grandchild attachment bond is highly salient and an important component of their self-identities and a significant factor in their everyday lives. Grandparenting roles can take added significance during times of family stress and crisis. During and after divorce, for example, grandparents can provide reassurance, continuity, stability, and emotional support at a time when parents may not be as emotionally available to their kids as usual, and grandparents are a sanctuary and a source of support otherwise not available to children. One of the main findings of grandparent research is that grandparenting today consists of enormous variations, which is a function of geographical proximity, age of grandparents, health status, social class, ethnocultural affiliation, and gender of grandchildren and age of grandchildren. There's also a discretionary aspect to these relationships. It's not uncommon for grandparents to involve and attach themselves differentially to grandchildren. Whereas most grandparents have a relationship with their grandchildren, some have no contact with their grandkids, either by choice or increasingly as a result of grandparent alienation. Grandparent alienation is the unjustified rejection of a grandparent by a child, in which the child's views of the grandparent are almost exclusively negative to the point that the grandparent is demonized and seen as evil, resulting from a campaign of denigration or brainwashing by the alienating parent, in which the child allies with the parent. In other words, it's a result of the programming of a grandchild by the parent to denigrate the grandparent, just in an effort to undermine the child's relationship with the grandparent. It doesn't pertain to those cases where a child has been victimized by abuse and the child is fearful of the grandparent as a result. For grandparent alienation to exist, 5 conditions need to be present. First of all, the child refuses contact and expresses either hatred or indifference toward the rejected grandparent. Secondly, there was a prior positive relationship in the past between the child and the now rejected grandparent. Thirdly, there's an absence of abuse or neglect by the grandparent. Fourth, there are multiple alienating behaviors by the alienating parent. And fifth, there are behavioral manifestations in the child, denigration of the grandparent, weak or untrue rationalizations, a lack of ambivalence, an absence of guilt, borrowed scenarios from the alienating parent, false statements based on false beliefs, based on false memories. In my study of alienated grandparents, the main reason for grandparent alienation was clearly identified. 80% of grandparents cited the discouragement of contact by their adult child-in-law, usually the mother. As far as the methods of grandparent alienation are concerned, 80% identified outright denied contact, 50% cited subtle or indirect means which made contact awkward, 30% identified relocation or lack of knowledge of the grandchildren's whereabouts, and 20% spoke of the constraints of highly controlled or restricted visits with grandchildren. Most grandparents cited a number of ways that contact was discouraged, but what prevailed was the frequency of just denied contact. A new study out this year expanded on my earlier findings, detailing the tactics of grandparent alienators. These tactics are similar to those directed at targeted parents in situations of parental alienation. They include these tactics: controlling contact, brainwashing, banning information, rejecting gifts and cards from the grandparent, false allegations, denigration, interrogation, secret keeping, manipulation when the family is still intact. That starts even before separation, emotional manipulation, social media blackout, encouraging disrespect, threatening correspondence to the grandparents. So what conclusions can we draw from these findings? First of all, a dominant theme that emerged is grandparents' grief response to the loss of contact with their grandchildren, which contains all the major elements of a bereavement. This suggests that following a period of access problems, there may be powerful psychological factors at work which may weaken grandparents in their negotiation of and demand for grandchild access, and may be a contributing factor in their eventual alienation. The effects of sudden grandchild absence and loss of the grandparenting role is really debilitating for those grandparents with previously strong attachments with their grandchildren. The so-called norm of interference may further limit the extent to which grandparents feel able to insist on their rights of access. Concern about interference in their children's affairs results in a reluctance on the part of many grandparents to insist on grandparent contact in the initial stages of contact loss. Concern about antagonizing parents and thereby jeopardizing ongoing contact with grandchildren serves as a catch-22 against grandparents. Early action toward ensuring access may antagonize the parent, who may then completely withhold access. But on the other hand, inaction in the initial stages of contact loss may jeopardize future contact. This double bind situation is especially pronounced during the divorce of adult children. Secondly, the data reinforce the centrality and very powerful position of parents, especially parents-in-law or adult children-in-law, as gatekeepers of the grandparent-grandchild relationship. What's been overlooked, however, is that it's actually the child-in-law, especially the custodial mother in divorce situations, and the father in non-divorce situations, that appears to be the main mediator of the relationship. 80% of alienated grandparents cited the discouragement of the child-in-law as the main reason for their lack of contact with their grandchildren. And 80% of those grandparents referred to outright access to the child-in-law. The actual extent of grandparent alienation is likely to have been underreported. It's hard to ascertain how much grandparent alienation is out there. That may be because grandparents find it difficult and painful to admit to and talk about the loss of such a salient relationship in their lives. Those grandparents who've been successful in maintaining contact are more ready to talk about the relationship with their grandchildren and avail themselves for research. Alienated grandparents are less visible, more reluctant to open up wounds, and also less likely to make use of traditional legal and therapeutic resources experiencing access difficulties, although they're beginning to make use of the help of grandparent support groups in that regard. So I'll now turn to the second half of my presentation, strategies for prevention and intervention in cases of grandparent alienation. I've divided this part of the presentation into two sections, prevention and intervention. I'll begin with prevention. Prevention begins with education, learning about the core elements and dynamics associated with both parental alienation and grandparent alienation. Learning that you're not alone. This is a phenomenon which affects millions of children and families worldwide. In my view, the best way to prevent grandparent alienation is to address the problem of parental alienation. Because when parents are alienated, grandparents are alienated as a result. And addressing parental alienation requires a multifaceted approach. Our solutions need to be both individual and systemic, both micro and macro level interventions. Many alienated grandparents channel their energies into combating the problem of parental alienation, including initiatives like recognition of parental alienation as a form of family violence, recognition of parental alienation as a form of child abuse, reform of family law in the direction of establishing a legal presumption of shared parenting, and advocating for therapeutic supports for affected children, parents, grandchildren, and extended family members. Also, in regard to prevention of grandparent alienation, is the importance of grandparents taking the high road in regard to maintaining good relations with adult children and children-in-law as gatekeepers of grandparent-grandchild relationships. By this, I mean being supportive of both parents in their parental roles, avoiding taking sides in disputes, and generally not getting caught up in conflict with either their own adult children or their children-in-law. The reality is that parents are gatekeepers of grandparent-grandchild relations, and it pays to maintain good relations with both parents. Next is intervention, support services for grandparents at risk of alienation. The challenges faced by these grandparents are many, as a kind of learned helplessness can easily set in, and it's important for grandparents to avail themselves of support services wherever possible. First are legal supports. Grandparents do have legal rights, but the extent of these vary from one state and province to another. Legal systems, though, often lose sight of the well-being and best interests of children caught in the middle of an alienation situation, despite the rhetoric of the best interests of the child in legal proceedings. My best advice to grandparents would be to proceed with caution as far as legal intervention is concerned. At the same time, though, keep in mind that extreme grandparent alienation may be a form of family violence, and family violence is a criminal matter. Next are therapeutic resources, including both reunification programs and therapeutic supports, and services for grandparents and their grandchildren. As is the case with parental alienation, therapeutic intervention in cases of grandparent alienation is a very sensitive matter. Reunification efforts should be undertaken with service providers with specialized expertise in parental alienation and grandparent alienation reunification. Alienated children seem to have a secret wish for someone to call their bluff, to compel them to reconnect with family members they claim to hate. Despite strongly held positions of alignment with an alienating parent, alienated children want nothing more than to be given the permission and freedom to love and be loved, not only by both of their parents, but also their grandparents and extended families. I hear from many alienated grandparents, and the main message I would give them is never give up. I tell them, in the face of rejection from your grandchildren, always respond with loving compassion, emotional availability, and total safety. Patience and hope, unconditional love, being there for your grandchild is the best response that you can provide, even in the face of the sad truth that may not be enough to bring back your grandchild. While professional service providers such as lawyers and family counselors can be of great benefit to grandparents at risk of alienation, mutual aid self-help groups can be vital to grandparents who are feeling alone and isolated as they struggle with the fallout of alienation. I use the term learned helplessness to describe the experience of many grandparents, and self-help groups can work wonders in regard to empowering grandparents and in recognizing and validating the important role they play in the lives of their grandchildren. And finally, I'd like to talk about a promising intervention that's underutilized but holds tremendous promise as an alternative to legal intervention and also to traditional therapeutic intervention in cases of grandparent alienation, and that is multi-generational family mediation aimed at grandparent-grandchild reunification in cases of alienation. I'd like to make 2 points in regard to mediation. When divorcing parents come into mediation with child custody and access disputes, it's important for mediators to assess the nature of grandparent-grandchild relationships. There are established positive bonds. It may be useful to involve family elders in the actual mediation negotiations. There'll be instances where this will be helpful and instances where it won't. Secondly, mediators have an important role to play in the resolution of access disputes between grandparents and parents, regardless of the circumstances, whether it's a divorce or another circumstance surrounding broken contact between grandparents and grandchildren. As legal remedies have largely proved to be unhelpful in this difficult area, mediation may be an important opportunity for the opportunity for the mediation profession to have a strong and positive impact. It's a largely untapped area, an important area for mediation. And given grandparents' reluctance to utilize adversarial means to deal with access difficulties, family mediators may be key in providing alternative mechanisms to deal with impasses as they occur. So in closing, the case for ongoing grandparent involvement in the lives of grandchildren has been made clear in the research literature. Child development experts agree about the importance for the child to maintain meaningful post-divorce family relationships that are beneficial, and this includes grandparents. We also know from the research that grandparents may be the most important source of support to children and parents during divorce, at a time when parents, overwhelmed by the multiple transitions and stresses they're facing, are relatively insensitive to children's emotional needs. Grandparents can be the safety net for the family during divorce. The problem exists that few grandparents initiate a request for help, although self-help groups are very helpful to them. Part of the reason for grandparents' reluctance may be that their needs are rarely addressed in family counseling, therapy, and mediation. The main concern for grandparents after parental divorce is that of access to their grandchildren. How best to work with this concern? Empower grandparents in relation to access. Educate parents regarding the importance of grandparents to children's well-being during and after divorce. Educate all family members in regard to guidelines and expectations for behavior after divorce that will be acceptable to all. The past few years have seen a widespread recognition among professionals and the public at large of the prevalence and harmful effects of parental alienation on children and families. The time has now come for grandparents to assert themselves to bring about a similar recognition and validation of the salience of grandparent-grandchild attachment bonds and the devastating effects of grandparent alienation on both grandparents and grandchildren. Like parental alienation, grandparent alienation is a primal wound that constitutes both a form of family violence and child abuse. Thank you for your time today.
Sadly, too many know the pain and trauma associated with parental and grandparent alienation. Family Access, Fighting for Children's Rights, will present an important international virtual conference in 2023. Alienation, the Truth Regarding the Trauma and Abuse, will feature world-renowned experts in the field of alienation. You'll join conference event coordinator Elaine Cobb and moderator Dr. Colleen Murray as they introduce you to keynote speaker Dr. Edward Kruk. Plus, you'll hear important presentations from Dr. Joshua Coleman, Lisa Rothfuss, Dr. Mary Alvarez, Dr. Colleen Murray, Bill Eddy, Dr. Noel Hunter, Dr. Sue Kornbluth, Dr. William Burnett, and Megan Hunter. For a limited time only, you can take advantage of a pre-early bird special price for the entire conference coming next October. Join the many attendees already securing their spot for the conference Alienation, the Truth Regarding the Trauma and Abuse. Visit familyaccess.info for all the details. This special conference is being hosted by Family Access, Fighting for Children's Rights, Steel Partners Foundation, and PASCA, Parental Alienation is Child Abuse.
Hello, everyone. I'm Elaine Cobb. I'm founder and president of Family Access, Fighting for Children's Rights. I'm also your host and executive producer of Families Divided TV. We hope that the work that we do through both Family Access, Fighting for Children's Rights, and now adding this year, Families Divided TV, is helping all of you, especially the alienated family members and also those who are professionals who work in the field of alienation. Next year is going to be an incredible year for us, and I do hope you'll continue to be a part of it and invite many, many others. So I encourage you, if you are not a subscriber yet to our Families Divided TV YouTube channel, please do so. It doesn't cost you anything, and you'll get firsthand knowledge of everything going on strictly through the YouTube channel. You're going to also now, even if you're a subscriber and if you become one, you'll be getting immediately new additions to our YouTube channel that I add weekly, sometimes 2 and 3 times a week. So all of these things can help you. We've got some great things in store. So I encourage you to please go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. It also helps us through YouTube and then recognizing us, because alienation, as we all know, is extremely important. And as a niche, we want to be recognized to help many, many others who don't even realize they're in the middle of alienation. Their families are getting ready to be divided if they haven't already. And we want to help in every way we can through many professionals in doing all we can to possibly not let this happen. And if it has happened, to help through it. So please, if you would, go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel, because you want to be a part of everything going on for next year. And to do that, you need to be a part of that. We're going to even be starting live segments through our YouTube. So go ahead and subscribe and get ready for a great 2023 and helping to bring more recognition to alienation as it is abuse. Thanks and God bless.
Next week on Families Divided TV, Dr. Susan Heitler addresses alienation. Do adults do it to their adult siblings?